My name is Mark Perry, or as they refer to me, the guy who has to follow Ernie. Thank you all for being here. Thank you very much. I'm supposed to talk about national security reporting in the current environment. No holds barred, no less, national security reporting. And I'm going to do that, but I'm going to take a bank shot to do it, if you don't mind, and talk about two phrases that keep kind of going through my mind when I do my reporting on the U.S. military and intelligence communities. And the first phrase is national interest. And the second phrase is skin in the game. Now, we always hear and we use the term national interest, and it's an important phrase, but not many people, I don't think, really know what it means when we talk about U.S. national interests. And so we can define it: free markets, free trade, free elections. Wilson's 14 points, the 4 pillars of Roosevelt. But I think that taking a look at reporting, and in one report in particular that kind of struck me, and it keeps coming back to me, would help us define national security. Last summer, in the pages of Foreign Policy and in Political, a man by the name of Jonathan Schanzer, who's an official with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, or as I refer to them, the Foundation for the Defense of Israel, wrote an article suggesting that what the President of the United States should do, in particular in the wake of the coup in Egypt, was to pick up the phone and call the Emir of Qatar and lecture him about Qatar's support for Hamas, and tell the Emir that it was time to stop supporting Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist groups, or the United States would have to rethink its relationship with Qatar. And I read this piece, and I thought, all right, let's suppose that the President Obama reads this piece, which seems improbable, but let's suppose he did, and then he were to actually follow the advice of Jonathan Schanzer of the Foundation for the Defense of Israel and call the Emir of Qatar and say, it's time for you to rethink your relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's time for you to rethink your relationship with Hamas, or by golly, we're going to do whatever. And the Emir of Qatar would say, well, thank you for your call, Mr. President. Certainly going to take that into consideration. I'm going to meet with my cabinet, and I'll get back to you. And then the Emir of Qatar, I just envision this, you can tell me if I'm wrong, would pick up the phone and he'd call the chairman of the board of the Exxon Mobil Corporation. And he'd say, you know, I just got a call from the President of the United States, and maybe I'm out of line here, but I got lectured by him, and I'm wondering what you think about that. And the chairman of the board of ExxonMobil would say, well, it's a very interesting phone call. Let me talk to my government relations people in Washington and give me a few days, and I'll get back to you. And then he would probably call the President of the United States. I'm just hypothesizing here now. And he would say, Mr. President, there are 89,000 jobs in Texas dependent on a contract with the Emir of Qatar. That's our national interest. Jobs, trade, putting Americans to work. The U.S. Central Command, which protects U.S. and other shipping in the Persian Gulf, was formed in 1983 by President Ronald Reagan, not to counter Iran, but to protect American shipping with a little old country, Qatar, because the then Exxon Corporation had signed a $50 billion contract with Qatar to ship natural gas to ports in Texas, which is the national interest. Not destroying Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. Free markets, free trade, free elections is the national interest. And those countries that can serve the national interests are our friends. The second phrase, now that's how I define national interest. And the second phrase is skin in the game. It's a pretty crude phrase. I'm sure you've heard it. It's used in the Pentagon all the time when they talk about, when the military talks about the wars that they have fought and are fighting or might fight, and they talk about who America's friends are and who aren't America's friends, and how they sell the war or don't sell the war, how they support the war or don't support a war on Capitol Hill. And regularly, I will hear a colonel say, you know, the people we really respect when it comes to talk about war are those people with skin in the game. That is, who are willing to sacrifice their lives of their soldiers and their national treasure in protecting their national interest. And unless you have skin in the game, you don't count for much with the U.S. military. That's what skin in the game means. And I heard my friend Gareth Porter here this morning talking about a prospective war against Iran. And the skin in the game here would be U.S. skin, and not Israel's. Now, the President of the United States gave a State of the Union address, and during his State of the Union address, he said that the Senate was considering a sanctions bill against Iran, that if it came to his desk, he would veto it. And the next day after he gave that speech, if you'll recall, 3 of the major co-sponsors of that bill dropped off the bill. What happened? Did the president's words scare the senior senator from Connecticut? Was Senator Menendez cowed by President Barack Obama? Or was it that there were a series of briefings on the Hill, very quick briefings, from the U.S. military, which has skin in the game, that said that the United States war against Iran would last 90 days and that we would prevail in such a conflict and would cost us $2 billion a day, 5,000 American lives, and probably 2 destroyers, and that it would not be a campaign of shock and awe, but an ugly, bloody confrontation. Did the Senate think that when the military didn't want to go to war over Syria, it would somehow want to go to war with Iran? That's skin in the game. So my focus in reporting over the last 3 years in a series of articles that began in March of 2010 have focused on national interest and skin in the game. And in March of 2010, I learned that General David Petraeus, who is the head of the U.S. Central Command, had been wandering through some of the towns and cities of Iraq during the surge, and when he went into many Iraqi homes, he would see a big picture in the living room, many Iraqi homes, of the holy sanctuary in Jerusalem. And invariably, the male of the family would say, you know, the Palestinian issue really, and he kept hearing it, and he kept hearing it. He went to his staff, this is General Petraeus, the smartest guy in the room, and he said, this Israeli-Palestinian thing is really a big deal here, isn't it? I'm telling you the truth. It kind of was starting to dawn on him as the head of the U.S. Central Command, that the Israeli-Palestinian issue was providing an obstacle to the resolution of political problems in the Middle East, so he sent his staff out to visit the military staffs of his area of responsibility, the Arab countries' area of responsibility, and they said, the primary obstacle to the respect for America and American ideals and American national interest was the failure of the United States to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now I heard about, then he sent his staff to brief Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who listened closely to the briefing, to the part where it said that the failure to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is an obstacle to American national interests. And I was told about the briefing, and I published the results of the briefing, and the day after I published it, I was scared to death because David Petraeus was going to testify in the US Senate. And I thought he could probably legitimately deny that any of this had ever happened, and I'd look like a schmuck. I was in my car in the GW Parkway, and I pulled over listening to his testimony, and he was asked by Senator McCain whether he believed that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was the primary obstacle to American national security interests in the Middle East, and he said, "Yes, I do." You could have heard a pin drop in this town. But it's been said again and again and again from the commanders of U.S. Central Command, from David Petraeus to James Mattis, and most recently by Lloyd Austin, that we're going to have to resolve this conflict or we're going to continue to suffer in our relations with the Arab world. And good relations with the Arab world is in our national interest. I then reported two other articles which I urge you to read on foreign policy. One is a false flag about how Israel recruited members of the terrorist group Jandallah by saying they were CIA agents. And the second article is on how Israel is going to use or had planned to use Azerbaijan as a launching point for an attack on Iran and how that affected and might affect our national interests and what the military thought about this. And I'll close with two comments. We're here to reassess the Israel-US relationship. That's the name of this conference, and I'm going to be a little bit perhaps too optimistic. It is being reassessed. And I understand how important and powerful AIPAC is, but there is no more powerful lobby in Washington than the US military. The Prime Minister of Israel might call the President of the United States, and the President might or might not take the call. But when the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff calls the President answers the phone. And that's the difference, because the President and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff have skin in the game. Malcolm Hoenlein, I'll close with this, said recently, and I think this is important. Malcolm Hoenlein is the president of the Organization of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations. You all know that, right? He said, and I want to quote him, when he was talking about increasing sanctions on Iran, he said, "I don't want to visit any more memorials to dead Jews," to which I think our response and the military's response is and has been, right. And we don't want to visit any more memorials to dead Americans. Thank you.